Hi, and welcome back to IV Tutor. My name is Edmund, and we are looking at GUI programming today, right? So for this course, you are required to build user interfaces using code. There's another way, obviously, of doing it, but it's part of the course for you to learn how to build user interfaces. So we're going to talk about two things. Number one, how do you build a user interface? Number two, how do you add the interactions? Like if you click this happens, click there, this happens. So it's a two-step process pretty much. And I love to separate these two things because it makes it easier for you to understand exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. But it doesn't mean that when you answer questions, you do it in two steps. You can just do it everything in one go. But at least for the sake of understanding the concept, I split this into two. The first part is let's understand how to build the user interface. And then the second step is let's understand how to add our interactions to our program so that it actually works. All right, so the first thing you really want to do is to understand what widgets are available. And the word widget is referring to all the graphical components that you can have on a user interface, like your push buttons, your line edits, your spin boxes, all those things. And one easy way to do it is to make a new project, widgets application. I'm going to leave this as untitled because I'm going to throw this away very soon. Next. Well, for the sake of demonstration, you don't have to change anything here. You just go next, right? Or you can choose your widgets, whatever. It doesn't really matter for this one. So what I wanted from the previous step is to leave this box here that says generate form checked, right? So let's go next and finish. What this does is it creates a forms folder, and under here, you can build your user interface. And you can do that by dragging these components from this panel onto your form. So I can say, well, I want a label. So I can take this, put it there. Then I can say, I want a line edit, take this, put there, and I can say, I want a push buttons. I can, take this push button here, put it here. And I can say this is okay. And, I can just build my user interface like this, depending on the requirements, right? But this is not what you are supposed to do for this course. It's not for this course. That's not how you do it. You do it manually. You build it using code. But what might be important for you is to come and see the available widgets. Your push buttons, radio button, checkbox. We don't touch these views in this course. Your group box, we never really use it. Even these frames, we hardly use those. But your input widgets like your combo box, your line edit, your text edit, spin box, double spin box, time edit, date time edit. You need to know these components are your label, your calendar, LCD number. Those are the basic ones that we normally use for the most part. Okay, and then the last thing that you need to understand is layouts. We're going to talk about layouts very soon. But basically, when I go through this list and just understand available widgets, like what would you use? These are not the names of the classes. You can find out what is the actual class name for this widget. But having a clear understanding of the widgets available and what they can be used for really, really helps you. It helps you understand your options when building a user interface, right? So I'm going to throw this away. I don't need it. And let's do it the right way. So you make a new project. It's a widgets application. Obviously, let's call this one GUI programming example 1. Let's click next. Now, on this step, remove that. All right. And in most cases, you go with QWidget or QDialog. I'm going to go with QWidget. And then you go next, finish. So this generates a class for you called a widget. And we're going to come back to it very soon. Let me just close this project here. This class here called a widget, right? So let's look at the example that we want to look at today. And this one says, write the code for an application to convert and display a decimal number in binary and hexadecimal notation. So you're required to enter an integer. And once you've entered that integer, you then need to display it. Its binary equivalent and its hexadecimal equivalent. So yeah, that's what needs to happen. But basically, the first step that I wanted to talk about is how do we build this thing? How do we have something that looks like this? A widget, a Q widget, sorry, here's this, excuse me, minimize, maximize, whatever. A Q dialog doesn't have, it just has a clause. So a dialog is meant to be a fixed window, you know, that just pops. But a widget is more like your flexible, you know, convenient form that you can minimize, maximize, move around, all of that. That is the main difference between a dialog and a widget. Right, so how do you build a user interface that looks like this? Okay, so the first class that we need to talk about is this window. Like, what kind of window do you want? And this is where I'm saying you've got two options. You can go with the Q widget, or you can go sometimes the Q dialog, right, as your main container. In this case, obviously, because we see these things, it means we are going with a Q widget, and we already have. So your first class that you should introduce is based on the type of window that you want. Do you want a dialog? Do you want a widget? In this case, we are going with a widget. So you define a class that's going to be your window, or this form here. Now, that has been done for us already in this program because we have this class called widget. It doesn't have to be called widget. It's just a name. It could have been anything. You can actually rename it if you want to something else, but we don't care. I'll leave it like that. It's called widget, but it could be any name. And this class must inherit from a Q widget, which then makes this class a Q widget. And now I'm referring back to these two classes. Either you inherit from a Q widget or you inherit from a Q dialog. If we inherit from a Q dialog, then we get a Q dialog. If we inherit from a Q widget, then we get a Q widget. So in this case, we have inherited from a Q widget, which obviously has been included. I want to make it simple for you. This doesn't really matter. If it says Q widget parent equals 0, it's a default argument, right? They are saying it needs a parent, but you can leave it out if you don't need it. So if you're writing the code, you can still leave it out and just go, here's my constructor. Your constructor has the same name as the widget. I'm going to remove everything else we don't need for this part. Under public, we've got our constructor, we've got our destructor. It's as simple as that. So it's a simple class now, right? If we go to the implementation file, I am also going to make this very simple for you. This is not important for our discussion, so I'll leave it like that. Okay, here's our constructor, here's our destructor. Now it's very clean and simple. If we run it, what do we get? We get a blank dialog. So when we run it, where does it say, okay, show the dialog? That happens in your main function. The code in your main function we hardly touch. We don't even need to touch actually. This is where it says, make an instance of our widget and then please show it. When I leave it like that, no need to touch it, it's gonna stay like that. But this is where it makes an instance of our class that has been auto-generated for us. It's being instantiated for us and it's being shown for us. So if we run it, we simply expect to see our widget because it's saying show it, and it should be blank because nothing is on it, right? So let's just see what it looks like right now. There it is, there's our widget. So we need to move it from being blank to something like that. And the first part of this video is how do we build this user interface. So the first thing you want to do is identify the widgets that you have on your dialog so that you know exactly what you're going to be using to build your interface. So in this case, I can say, well, I have a label, right? So this here is a label. So I know I'm going to need a Q label. I've got a button. This is a Q push button. That's the actual name of the class. I have a line edit. So this here is a Q line edit. And that is why I said it's important to actually go through that list and identify what else you have. And this is the same as a Q push button as well. And here, they've given it for us. It's a Q LCD number. So these two here, we've got a Q LCD number. That's the name of the class. What else do we need? That's all we need for us to create this user interface. Okay, we have identified all the components or all the widgets that we need to create this user interface. The next step is, okay, how do we arrange them on this user interface? And to do that, we're going to talk about what are called layouts. A layout is what you use to lay out your widgets on your window or on your form. And we've got about 4 different types of layouts. We've got a QH box layout, QV box layout, we've got a Q grid layout, we've got a Q forms layout, different layouts. But I'm going to touch on 3. The first one is the QH box layout. And H here stands for horizontal. And in the same way, we've got a QV box layout. And V here stands for vertical. And the last one I want to touch on is the Q grid layout. And this one just says it in the name, right? So the QH box layout arranges items horizontally. So they go in this direction, right? The QV box layout arranges items vertically. So they go in this direction. And then the Q grid layout puts items on a grid. So you've got rows and columns, depending on what you are trying to do. So these are the 3 types of layouts that we mostly use depending on the kind of user interface that you want to create. So if we go back and we look at the interface that we have here, we've got to choose which layout is going to work for us. Should we use the QH box layout? Should we use the V box layout? Should we use the grid layout? And you can also use a combination of these layouts to create this. For example, we could say, well, let's use a V box layout and H box layout. If we do it like that, we could say, well, let's take these items and put them on a horizontal layout. So these would be horizontal, right? Like that. Let's take these ones and also put them on a horizontal layout, like that. Same applies to these 2 here. Let's put these also on a horizontal layout. Then let's take these 1, 2, 3, maybe we'll leave this one out, 4 items and put them on a vertical layout. So these then are laid out in a vertical way. So this would be the first one, this would be the second one, that would be the third, and then the 4th row of our vertical layout. In this case, we would have used a combination of a grid, of a horizontal and a vertical layout. Or we could just say, well, let's use a grid layout and use rows and columns for all of this. So in that case, what I would then do is I just draw a grid. So if I'm using a grid in this case, it's going to look something like this. I'm going to have, a grid. It's going to be something like that, just a normal grid. And I'm going to have columns like that. So already you can identify that I've got column, 0, column 1, column 2. I've got row 0, 1, 2, 3. And that's my grid. So I could actually use a grid layout, which means when positioning my items, I put this label on column or row 0, column 0, this one row 0, column 1, this one row 0, column 2, and the same goes for each of these items. And I'm not putting anything here. it's a grid. There is also another way I could build this user interface, and I'm going to use a grid layout in this case because I think it's just a bit quicker. All right. So that is the second thing that you want to do. So first thing, identify your components or your widgets. Second thing, identify your layout. And the steps in building a user interface are pretty straightforward. What you do, number one, is you make your components or your widgets. Number two, you put them on the layout. Number three, you take the layout, you put that on the form, and you're done. So it's a three-step process. Instantiate your widgets, instantiate your layout and put your widgets on the layout, take your layout and put that on the window or on the form, and then everything is done. So it's more like a hierarchy that you're creating because you've got your Q widget. Your Q widget is going to have the layout, and the layout is going to have all your widgets sitting on it, right? So these will be your widgets. So it's more like a hierarchy that looks like this. And it's going to be important to understand why it's actually a hierarchy when we start talking about design patterns and how Q objects behave. What's a Q object? Don't worry, we'll get there, right? But it's a hierarchy, okay? So let's go straight into our code and start building this user interface. And you're going to see that it's actually very straightforward. First off, let's close this program. Let's go back to our Qt. And in here, I said the main function, we don't touch. It shows the window. That's all we need to do. So you hardly hear me mention the main function in this case. Let's go back to our widget. So here, we have identified all the widgets that we need. So you're going to need to include them, right? We know we need a Q label. We know we need a Q push button. We know we need Q line edit, and we need Q LCD number. What else have I left? Our label, our line edit, LCD number, and our push button, right? And we said which layout are we going to use? The grid layout. So I'm going to go Q, hash include Q grid layout, like that. So that's all we need. And I'm going to go in my constructor and start building my user interface. And I said, we're going to do this in 3 steps. Now, step number 1 is create your widgets, right? Step number 2 is create layout and put widgets on the layout. And step number 3, we said add the layout to the form, right? Or to our window, to our main window. Other things we may want to do here is also to set the title of our window, right? And the title is this at the top here, right? That's the title that we want to set, so that it says decimal to bin X converter. That is, I think, the last thing that we would want to do. But these are the steps that we want to take, and let's do it. Okay, so the first thing we need our label. So you're gonna go Q label. And one thing I want to also mention here is when building your user interface, make every single thing a pointer. Every single thing must be a pointer, right? So our Q label here, I'm going to give it some name. I'm going to call it input label equals new Q label. And most of these widgets require you to set the parent. So if I had to set a parent, I could say maybe use the current class as the parent, and the second argument could be the actual text that I need on my label, right? So actually this should be the second argument. The first one should be the text and then the parent. But you don't have to include it every single time, and we'll understand why later on. I can just put the label. So this one says enter an integer. So this is representing the first label that we need, which is this guy. So next, I'm going to define this one, and then this one, and then this. So we are going to have 2, 4, 6, 8 widgets, all of these, right? So I'm going to just do them in order. What do we need? Q line edit. Q line edit. Let's call this one input line edit. You can give it shorter names if you want, because new Q line edit. I don't have to do anything here and leave it like that. I need a push button for the convert button. So I can go Q push button. I'm gonna go btn equals new Q push button. And in here, I'm gonna put the text, which is convert. Like that, I'm gonna ignore the parent. Let's do another label. So I'm gonna go Q label. This one is the binary label. So I'm gonna call it bin label because new Q label, and this one is gonna say binary. And let's call Q LCD number. This one is going to be the, I'm gonna call this one bin LCD because new Q LCD number. Nothing I need to do there. I'm gonna do this again for the second one, which is now the hex one. And finally, I need, no, not finally, I also need my label for the hexadecimal one. So I'm gonna go, doesn't matter the order that you use, you can use any order. So don't worry about the ordering. This one is the hex label. It's new Q label. This one is gonna say hexadecimal as it is on the diagram. And then finally, I need my last push button, Q push button. I'm gonna call this one clear btn equals new Q push button. And it's gonna say clear, yeah. So I've got everything that I need, right? All my widgets have been initialized. The next thing that I want to do is then have my layout. So I'm gonna use a grid layout. So I'm gonna go Q grid layout. Let's not call it layout. Layout because new Q grid layout, like that. That's my layout. And then I'm going to position my items on my grid in this order. So I know what to put on row 0, column 0, row 1, row 0, column 1, and so on and so on. So I'm simply going to position my items on my grid, starting with the first label, which is supposed to go on row 0, grid in column 0. So I can then say layout dot add widget, and here I'm going to put my input label, right? And this is going on row number 0, column 0. There is also other arguments you can specify, like the row span, column span. If you want things to span over columns, you can also play around with those things. As you can see, the compiler is helping you out to see what the function actually looks like. So feel free to go and look at the functions and understand how those functions work. Like in this case, you can see at the top there, it says int column, row span, column span, which means you can actually specify the row span if you want something to span over multiple rows. So you can play around with those things. Otherwise, I want my label on the first grid. Then I'm gonna go layout dot add widget. And now I put my line editor. I called it input line edit. That goes on row 0, column 1. And okay, I'm done adding all my widgets and putting them on their right rows and columns according to this diagram here. So that was just very straightforward. The next step is to then put my layout on the form. And to do that, there's a function inbuilt already. All you do is you simply go set layout and give it the layout. This function exists on the form. So you can go this.set layout. It's a Q widget function or Q dialog function. So, or you can just go set layout. It still works. And that's it. And the last function that I also want to use is an inbuilt function which sets the title for the window, and it's called set window title. And this one sets the title, and I want to call it decimal to bin or a hex converter, like that. And once this has been done, we have built our user interface. So it's a very straightforward process that I don't think you guys should really struggle with. So if we run it, we should be able to see our user interface looking exactly the way we need it to look. And there we go. There is our thing. I mean, you can resize it. You can also set how big you want it to look initially when you create it, but it looks good enough, right, for what we need. So that's how you build a user interface. It's very straightforward, very easy to do. Just understand the 3 simple steps. Instantiate your widgets, choose your layout, and position your widgets on the layout. Take your layout and set it as the layout for your widget, and then set the title if you want to. Otherwise, straightforward, easy. You can play around with other user interfaces that you may want to create using different kinds of widgets. But otherwise, these simple steps are always what you do. And remember, you build your user interface inside the constructor. So next up, we're going to look at how do we make it behave? How do we make it do what we want it to do? Like if we click things, we want things to happen. Because right now, if you click your buttons, nothing really happens because, well, it's just a user interface. Clear, you can type whatever you want. It's not really doing anything. So we need to add life to this thing. How do we add our interactions and make it do stuff, right? And that is what we are going to look at in the next video. See you soon.